I just can't get enough of your love. I just can't get enough of your love. I got a car and it takes unleaded. I know a place with a tab-on credit, so I fill the tank and get some cokes for my friends. Lord, it's good to be back home again. It feels crazy running down these roads when I see the streets, and my mind always goes back to the old days of '94. They don't make them like that anymore. trying to make it all on your own. Just remember what Cher says. Mom, I am a rich man. I ain't scared to go it all alone. 'Cause I can do whatever I wanna, all by my lonesome. If that's a problem, well, you can't say shh. 'Cause I'm going my way, living in day. And I can buy my own damn denim and diamonds. I can buy my own damn denim and diamonds. I can buy my own damn.
Hey, I'm Bill DeVille, and I'm here with Nikki Lane. Nikki, so nice to see you.
It's nice to be here. It's been a long time, huh?
It has been. I just looked at my photos this morning, and I went back to 2017, and there it was. You were here in 2017, in the fall, I think it was. And this is actually your first album in 5 years, so that was the last album was the last time you were here.
That's true. It's been a long time coming, huh?
Yeah.
Some would say too long in this industry. You almost lose your job when you make it 5 years.
Right.
But
So what have you been up to in the last 5 years?
working like crazy.
Yeah?
You know, for a while, it takes 2 or 3 years to tour a record, and I've been really lucky with the people I've been able to support and open for. So that went for a long time. And just when I was tired of being the highway queen and thinking that I was really, really worn out, the pandemic happened.
Right.
And I said, nothing makes you want your job back like taking it away.
Sure.
So I felt really grateful for that time off, but it also like recharged me to kind of like want to make another album. I think I started reflecting like what's on the back end of an album, which is all of this touring and grueling work schedule. Because I love the fans, I love the shows, but there's a lot of other things that go into it that can wear you down.
So how does it feel to be back out on the road? You know, after
It's
not
great,
really
and it's
touring?
also wild. I came in here all like, like I said, it's good to be in a bad mood when you play rock and roll. But 40 shows about that we've done since September 27th. So we've been pushing it really hard. But in the same token, I wanted to do the work this year so that people could hear the new record and see the progress next year. So it feels really energizing to see the rooms grow. The longer we're out here, our shows started selling out towards the end of tour. So you see the like light at the end of the tunnel, literally, and just keep pushing. I think as much as it's grueling to be on tour, the individuality of like hanging out and talking to each fan at night afterwards, like I see why I love this job. It's the relating to people.
So one thing I noticed last night is you did some crowd surfing. I've seen you before, Nikki, but I don't think you crowd surfed before.
Well, I didn't have a full enough room, to be frank, but I said, we did it once in Vancouver, maybe in that 5 years ago thing. Like the room was just so, and I grew up going to Christian punk shows. I said my mom was really worried about me wearing black and like listening to punk rock. She didn't know like what that meant for like my future. I was going to be a bad girl or something.
Yeah.
And now my mom's in like black and studs all the time. Like, she's very like Harley girl a little bit. But I think as a single mother, she just didn't want us to like branch out and get in trouble. But at the end of the day, the worst she had to worry about was a concussion for me to like fall in a crowd of like Christian punk rockers. And now when I'm at these shows, I've just felt like it was really fun. I actually kind of got back into it because I went to a Viagra Boys show, which is our walk-on song right now. Because as much as I sing country or whatever, I love listening to rock and roll. And that's one of my favorite bands right now. And we went to see them, and they gave us a seat in the like owner's box. And I was like, oh, cute. And then I went downstairs and they were like, you're not going to sit? And I was like, who sits in an owner's box at a punk show? And I went down to the crowd and my friend said, are you going to go in the mosh pit? I was like, I'm almost 40. Like, no. And the next thing I knew, I was on top of it. You know what I mean? It's just, I remembered. And I think that's what First High, the first single from the record's about. It's about letting loose and remembering what it's like to be young again. Yeah. And I feel like these are going to be some of my favorite years of playing tours because it's pre-theater and hopefully we make it into bigger rooms, but also there's nothing that kind of will replace this like jam-packed yelling room that you can lay into and ride to the bar and back.
Right.
It's so fun.
So tell us about the song First High. It seems like it's about growing up in, where was it, South Carolina? Is that where you grew up?
Well, it's like songs like Gone, Gone, Gone early on were celebrating getting out of South Carolina. And I think I spent a long time thinking about how grateful I was to have not been stuck in my hometown. And then again, something like the pandemic happens and you really crave off the beaten path and in the woods. You kind of want to get back out there into nature and away from a bunch of people. And I started reflecting a lot on my childhood, on the things that maybe were easy to kind of like talk negatively about growing up that actually crafted a lot of the sides of my personality that I really enjoy. And a lot of that for me, it's a very literal story. My mom had a Chevy Cavalier that she would let me drive occasionally, and but I wasn't supposed to take it nowhere far. And I'd kind of like pick a little fight with her and put on a record like Lifehouse, a Christian record, on repeat so that she wouldn't worry about me in the bedroom. And I'd climb out the window and I'd take her car down to my dad's the gas station. We had a tab on credit, just like it says, because he had an asphalt paving company, and I'd fill up that tank. I'd drive to Atlanta and see a show. And I'd drive right back, and I'd park my car back in Mama's spot, and she'd never know.
That's
I told her
awesome.
in my 30s that I had been doing that, and she said, I knew the oil changes weren't like really checking out. But I think those wild moments of my youth are something that I channel all the time in this job. But I think we've all got that sense of youth kind of sitting back in there, and I like kind of digging back in and remembering the nostalgic things that make me who I am.
The people have spoken. The song hit #1 in the Americana chart. How does
That's
that
true.
feel?
Yeah, I mean, it feels kind of crazy, right? I said it feels surreal because when I look at the people that were below me, right? Like in terms of like, I somehow ended up the top most played above a lot of people I've looked up to for a long time and people that I see just like blowing up. So it's really interesting because this is kind of, radio is kind of the people's choice. You know, we go around, we meet a lot of Americana programmers and it's like radio was something that people talked about maybe you didn't want to go do or something, you know, like when you're talking about being a career artist, but it's actually my favorite part of the job in that way because I really start to see how it trickles down and influences how many people come out in a town that I've never been to. And so it means a lot to me. It's also really surreal. It makes me want to bust because I'm like, wait a minute, all those people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But I think it shows a sign of growth and that, you know, after years of perseverance, it's working.
So tell us about the album Denim Diamonds. It's produced by Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age. What was it like working with Josh?
It was amazing. I texted him this morning to say that the tour was almost over and that I needed some approval from him, and he FaceTimed me with his kids to talk for a second because
sweet.
as much as he produced the record, he became a close friend. The pandemic, again, not to keep going back there, but we're gonna forever.
It's hard not to.
Yeah, but it was a time that you know, a lot of crazy stuff was happening because even though everybody had the downtime, that meant children in your household not being able to leave. You know, sharing that 600 square foot apartment with your partner that you never thought was a problem when you both had full-time jobs. Just a lot of adjustment. And I think that when we look back, when I see the notes that everybody wrote when the record came out, we talk about it like it was like a spiritual experience. And I think that was largely in part due to the music and the fact that he put together Carla Azar and Matt Helders on drums, Mikey from Queens on bass, you know, but also just that we all needed an experience like that at the time. So Josh was a great producer. You know, producers to me, you know, as much as they need a sonic stockpile of like ideas and like all of the racks of gear and everything, they also need to be a good communicator and a good dominant leader of other alphas. And so what I like is watching people pull together a roster of artists and then kind of finessing them in the room, but not micromanaging them. And, you know, it's not my first rock record, if we're being real, because Dan Arbach made one of them. You know what I mean? It's like in the sense of like who produced it. But it's they're both the same way where it's like I don't think you can definitely tell he made Denim Diamonds as the song and Black Widow. But I think there are other songs where he literally didn't come in that room. He sat in the control room and let us work it out. And I think that's a real producer to me too, is someone that helps me find my sound. He kept pushing me forward to say what I wanted, you know, and now I feel like I have something that's most representative of me.
Yeah. One thing that made me really happy is you just played the song Faded, which is, I think, my favorite song on the album. And Josh is on that one. He kind of duets with you on that one.
That was a very emotional song, I think, for everybody in the room at the time. It was, for me, as much as there's a lot of songs that were written for the record, once I knew Josh was producing, I leaned into things like Black Widow and Pass It Down. But I also, because I was feeling so comfortable in the room every day, would come in and play them old songs that had kind of been nestled away and never had a chance to be seen. And Faded was that one. It was a really dark time for me that I had written, and I grew up in some domestic violence in my family, so it was leaning into some spots that were really harder to touch on. And when I shared it with them and saw the like physical reaction, you know, that they were really like gravitating towards the song. It was very easy to track. And I had told Josh it would be fun to have him sing on something, and he insisted on it being that one. And it's really powerful. I think it's a really important song for me too. And I think what I've learned about my songwriting is where I tried to code things and not be too forthcoming with their subject matter, you find that the people that they're about always resonate with them the most. So
Yeah.
it's a heavy one, but I was glad to bring it out, and I also think it's my fave.
I think it's your maybe most rock and roll record too.
By far, and I think it's where I belong. I said, if I can push a little bit harder into that realm for the one more additional record. I also think about people like Nathaniel Rateliff, who kind of remind me of like the Huey Lewis of like it's like very fun dancing songs. I want to find a little bit of that. But what I like about having 4 albums out now, 5 written, and a rock record is that I feel like my set with all my own music can go a lot of places. And so I feel like I finally did it. You know what I mean? It's like I want to keep doing it, but I feel very content with what body of work I have now.
Your shows do go a few different directions. You did a cover last night of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. Mm-hmm. I suppose that song has a long history with you, Fishing in the Dark.
I grew up listening to that song, and I said, in a climate where I go out and open for a lot of people who are really big, and I'm very lucky, but they don't ever know my songs, those fans. Like I'm brand new. It's an exploration to find me as the opener. I said that's how I like test out who I'm going to take with me to the next show. Like I play Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, I see who's singing, and I'm like, oh, you'll like the rest of this if you come out to a headlining show.
Yeah. I sure loved that cover last night of Lucinda Williams' Drunken Angel. And you talked about Lucinda a little bit at the show.
I'm just a huge fan of her. I've always said, I'm too polarizing to ever be as cool as Dolly Parton. Everybody loves her. I've already got some people that don't like me, and I'm never going to be Dolly Parton. You know what I mean? Love Loretta Lynn. But when I think about careers and what I really love, I love watching Lucinda throughout her entire career. She's maintained a sense of cool and independence and individuality. It's never waned. She had some great success with someone covering her song, you know what I mean? But she stayed in her lane, and I feel like, and defined it, and that's who I want to be. That's the career I'm looking for. I don't want the celebrity of some of my peers where we can't go places without being disturbed. If somebody says hi to me at this point, it's pretty exciting, at the airport or something. And I just really want to be like her. And literally we were driving through, I went and celebrated my birthday in the middle of this long tour schedule in New Orleans, and then started tour in Baton Rouge. And we did that long strip on 10. And I was like, well, we've got to listen to Car Wheels on a Gravel Road. We've got to listen to Lucinda.
Masterpiece.
Yeah, we started digging through. I started texting Charlie Sexton, like, thinking of you. All the things that are cool that I've gotten to tie into that world. And I texted the band. I said, there's no way. We have to do a song. And so Drunken Angel, it ended up being perfect. It's a great, and listening to the lyrics, it embodies kind of where I want to stay in that, like, not quite too famous, because when you think about what she's singing about, it's like you don't want to take it too far.
Right. She has such a rich history in the Twin Cities. She got married at First Avenue.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, her and Tom got married at First Avenue.
That's so fun. And Tom is great, running into them all over on the Outlaw Cruise, out in California, in Nashville now. I get really excited every time I see her.
You were a big fan of the Jayhawks, another Twin Cities band. And did you go to George Drakoulias' house? And you didn't even know how to play guitar yet? Tell us that story.
Well, that's kind of how I learned to play guitar. I just didn't think it was important. I still struggle with how good I'm supposed to be at it. And the same token, one of my best friends is Sierra Farrell. And what I love about her is when she's at my house, she's like, what did you say? Because she's always practicing guitar or fiddle. She's an incredible instrumentalist, and that's important to her. And for me, I like a lot of things. I'm like an entrepreneur by default, right? And it's like, but getting really good at guitar it's not natural for me. Mm-hmm. So it's never seemed like something I want to be like Bonnie Raitt. I admire her, but I don't think I'll ever be that good at playing a lead instrument. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I've just kind of written songs. My first record I wrote by strumming an open C and singing a melody. And I think I've written pretty strong melodies by not leaning on those chord progressions, but it didn't mean that I didn't need it. And case in point was that I basically, about that spiritualized tour we were talking about 12 years ago or something, my ex-husband now, but at the time my husband said, you know who you should get to work with? And I was like, who? And he was like, George Drakoulias. I said, who's that? And he was like, well, everything you've been listening to, he produces. And so it was some of the Tom stuff and also the Jayhawks. And I was like, oh, really? And I start reading the back because I'm not good at discography. I start reading the back. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess we should meet him, huh? And he's like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know, honey. He's like pretty big. And it turned out he was being managed by somebody at World's End. Sandy Robertson just passed away, but at the company that was my label at the time. And I went to him and I said, you think I can meet George Strakulias? He said, oh, yeah, let me call George. George would love you. And so he called George, and George said, well, just send her over to the house. And so I went over to the house, and I kind of didn't even know what I was, an honor it was at the time. I was just excited and young. I'm going to be a country singer, and I go over to his house, and he pulls out a guitar, and it's hand engraved. It's really beautiful. It's like got all these like cherubs and stuff on it. Very intricate Martin guitar. And it says Martin guitar. And on the back it says 1 of 2 handmade for Tom Petty.
Wow.
And this is a big deal. Like I get to touch this. My husband, anybody that I know would be geeking out. And I'm like, beautiful. And he's like, well, play me a song. And I was like, oh, okay. And that's where I call myself Clangety Lane. Because I just and he was like, what are you doing? Like, you can't play guitar? And I said, well, not really. There's lots of cute guys that can play guitar. I take them to the radio with me. And he was like, so you're going to go on radio and if you're just going to rely on cute guys for the rest of your career. And I was like, what, is that bad? And he was like, well, it ain't good. And I was like, yes, sir. And I went straight home and I learned how to play guitar within 3 months. Yeah. Because it was important to me to know what was important to the job, and it's like I said, it's not natural. I encourage people sometimes now learning to play guitar to play with an electric unplugged, because my thing was it sounded so awful for so long. I didn't want to do it, and now I feel quite competent, but really it's because I was motivated by embarrassment.
Right. Nikki, so nice chatting with you. It's Nikki Lane. The new album is called Denim and Diamonds. Congratulations on the new work. I think it's your best yet.
Thank you. I agree. And I hope I can always surpass it, but I'm very happy where it's at now.
Thank you, Nikki Lane.
Thank you to The Current.
The Current is public media made possible thanks to member support.